The Higher Ed Consortium's membership is made up of 7 Tulsa Region higher education institutions, including Langston University, TU, NSU, OSU Tulsa, RSU, TCC, and OU Tulsa. You'll notice each of the institution's colors embedded in the consortium logo. There are also 7 affiliate members that are featured below the institutions on the screen. The consortium's mission is 4-part: to align with its institutional partners to advance student learning in higher education, improve student success and degree completion, achieve equity in student outcomes, and meet workforce needs through collaboration. You might notice that the titles of each of the presentations this week, Transfer Week, link back to the mission of the consortium. The consortium's formation was actually rooted in transfer work through the Tulsa Transfer Project, which started in 2017. That project was intended to make Tulsa area students' post-secondary experiences as seamless as possible, specifically when transferring from TCC to a receiving institution. In regard to what the consortium is and does, the consortium seeks to align with the powerful efforts of the institutions to improve the experiences of students in the region, while also serving as a unifying and coordinating entity for colleges, universities, business, and community partners. Why are we here today celebrating National Transfer Student Week? Well, it goes back to that second part of our mission, supporting student success and degree completion. So now we're going to talk about transfer students. So it's really important to establish a common definition among the group. And I recognize that probably everyone in this room has experience working with transfer students, but for the sake of the group and level setting, want to name these definitions. A transfer student is someone who begins their post-secondary academic career at one institution, earns credit through completion of coursework, and then transfers to a different institution to finish their education. Transfer students are typically college sophomores or juniors. And then there are different types of transfer. So there's vertical transfer. That's where a student from a 2-year institution goes to a 4-year institution. There's a lateral, so 2-year to 2-year or 4-year to 4-year. There's reverse, where a student goes from a 4-year institution to a 2-year institution. There's swirling, where students may go to a variety of different institutions. And then I learned about something yesterday at the Oklahoma Transfer Student Support Conference, the thwarted. So students who are on their journeys to transfer and have been thwarted in some way aren't able to finish. So now let's localize it a little bit. So these data points are from TCC's Campus Facts page on the TCC website. TCC is our largest community college in the state with just over 20,000 students. The Tulsa Achieves program enables high school students in Tulsa to get their first 2 years of college for free. There are just over 2,000 concurrently enrolled high school students at TCC, meaning that they are high school students taking college credit, or pursuing college credit, sorry. So now that we have shared, So now that we've shared some definitions on transfer, I want to talk about equity and surface a couple of relevant definitions of equity. So here's one from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Equity refers to fairness and justice and is distinguished from equality. Whereas equality means providing the same to all, equity means recognizing that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge and make adjustments to remedy imbalances. The process is ongoing, requiring us to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers arising from bias or systemic structures. And that's the definition of equity that is framing this entire presentation. Also, a definition from the Lumina Foundation that I recently heard, and it really resonated, about racial equity. Racial equity is achieved when outcomes such as the likelihood of having a degree cannot be predicted by a person's race or ethnicity. So outcomes not predicted by characteristics like race or ethnicity. I'm going to reference a number of different resources during this presentation. Full warning that there will be some pretty heavy data. So I used specifically the National Student Clearinghouse reports to gather some of that data that you'll be seeing on the slides. And I will put the references to all of these resources in the chat box. Although I can't see it right now, so I can't do it at this second, but will before the end of our session. Okay. So from all of these resources, which come from the National Student Clearinghouse, from transfer partnerships, or from the New Directions for Community Colleges, and from the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students, I'm going to share a distilled list of best practices that research shows lead to more equitable outcomes. I do want to note that this list isn't necessarily exhaustive, and I will lean on the expertise of the group throughout the presentation, but you'll see in the next few slides, we'll talk about the first practice, which is to disaggregate and share transfer data. Aggregate data does not tell a nuanced story about where students are in their transfer process, and I'll actually illustrate that in the presentation. The second practice is to really seek to understand the journey of transfer students. It's easy to talk about transfer and mentally imagine, well, you transfer from one institution to another, but there's a lot of steps involved in that process, and to really empathize with students, it takes some time to understand their journeys as transfers and the different types of students that transfer. The third practice is to intentionally remove barriers along the journey. So once you understand what the journey is, remove the barriers along that path, and then provide supports and normalize help-seeking behaviors. And we've got some experts on this call who are actually going to help chime in about how they are doing that work. So we're going to start with the first practice, which is disaggregating transfer data. If you've had a chance to dive at any depth into transfer-focused data, you'll probably read repeatedly about the importance of disaggregating the data. Well, why? Because, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, aggregate data really does not allow you to have a nuanced picture of the student experience. When you look at the data and it's disaggregated by characteristics like race, ethnicity, gender, age, socioeconomic status, you can see a clearer picture of where supports are needed and for whom those supports would be most relevant. And then transfer partners that engage in consistent and comprehensive data sharing are able to track student progression and use this information to build a seamless pathway and identify gaps that lead to inequitable student outcomes. You can't fix the gap until you recognize that it's there and identify some strategies that can fill that gap. So I'm going to, over the next few slides, illustrate what this looks like. Because for many years, admittedly, and I have my PhD, I heard about the importance of disaggregating data. And I always was like, that sounds good. But I didn't know what that actually meant. So I am going to share that with you. So here we've got some national statistics. And this data is from the National Student Clearinghouse. The reports are actually cited here on the screen. I actually will just invite somebody to come off of mute. What does this data tell us?
Do you want to know the data and the reports or the data of the numbers on the screen?
Well, so There's about 1.3 million transfer students in the US, about 3,500 institutions, 38% national transfer rate. What is something interesting as you're looking at the screen? What is the data? How does the data speak to you? What are you taking away from this slide?
I would be curious to know even the breakdown of of those 1.3 million, where are they coming from within those over 3,000 schools? Is it more centrally located? Is it, on the outskirt, like the coasts? And where are those students going when they are transferring? Is it more local? Like here in Tulsa, we know that a lot of students stay local, but some of them are also going out of state. And I don't feel like I have a lot of support for my students that go out of state because I don't know how to help them transfer out of state as well as I do in state.
Thank you so much. So it provides a helpful provocation for more questions. It doesn't give us a big enough picture about, or a detailed enough picture about who these students are and how we can help them. So we're going to zoom in a bit. And again, this is national data from the National Student Clearinghouse. So if we look, this is total initial enrollments by race and ethnicity. And you can see in the different categories, the percentages of enrollment at 2, 4, 2-year, 4-year, and 4-year private nonprofit. So give you a second to look at that. So we disaggregated the national data and broke it up by race, ethnicity. And you can see that in terms of race and ethnicity, Black and Hispanic students enroll in 2-year colleges with higher frequency than white and Asian students. So now we're going to disaggregate that further because that maybe helps us understand where students are going, but it's not disaggregated enough to really develop strategies for support. So this data is kind of a busy slide, I recognize that, but it's broken down by race, ethnicity, and gender. So by another variable. And the colors represent, the green is completed at a starting institution, completed at a different institution. So at some point they transferred in their journey. The orange is still not enrolled and the blue is not enrolled. So when we disaggregate it further, we start to notice more nuanced trends that lead to the types of questions that need to be asked in order to remedy the disparities in transfer, in higher education, but in transfer supports.
Laura,
so on this, yeah.
I had a question. When it says like completed at starting institutions, does that account for those students who went to a 2-year and completed their associates and then went on?
It's whatever institution, whether it was a 2-year or a 4-year, if I'm understanding the resource correctly. And I shared it in the chat box, so I can go back and double check that for you. But from what I read, it's whether it's 2-year or 4-year, whether they completed at their starting institution.
Okay, thank you.
So on the previous slide, we saw that Black and Hispanic individuals enrolled with the highest frequency in 2-year institutions. And then on this slide, as we disaggregated, can see that Black and Hispanic men and women have lower transfer rates and higher not enrolled rates than other groups. And in this way, it quantifies the racial transfer gap and helps us to see it more clearly in the data. So now we want to do this on a more local level. So here is the Tulsa region student profile. There are roughly 40,000 students enrolled and attending colleges or universities in the Tulsa region. Just above 9,000 degrees were awarded in 2019. The student population does skew more heavily toward women, who make up about 56% of college and university students. 51% of students are between the ages of 18 and 24, which is an age range that's often considered traditional in the literature. And then 49% are between the ages of 20 or above the age of 25. And that's often classified in the literature as non-traditional or post-traditional students. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see a distribution in which 42% of students attending colleges and universities are considered students of color, including Black and African American, Hispanic and Latine, 2 or more races, Asian American Indian, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. According to Impact Tulsa's 2019 Community Impact Report, citing the US Census, the diversity of the city is growing, and within the next 10 years, this collective number will rise above 50%. So now we're going to look at some transfer. This is actually the first point on the screen here was back in 2017, 2018 at the formation of the Tulsa Transfer Project. This was a really motivating statistic for that work. In a cohort of students from 2010, looking at their 6-year completion trajectory, only in Oklahoma, only 15.5% of the students who started higher education at a community college completed a bachelor's degree in 6 years. And then in 2017, 2018, about 3,400 students transferred from TCC. Of these transfer students, 66.5% went to a consortium institution. And then the last point references the image on the screen. Disparities persist based on race and ethnicity as the rate of bachelor's degree attainment among white residents in Tulsa County, which is 36%, is nearly twice as high as the rate among African American residents, which is 19%, and over 3 times higher than the rate among Hispanic residents. So I mentioned the importance of disaggregating data to understand the full nuanced profile of transfer students, and hopefully these few slides help you see why disaggregating that data is so important. It's important to also disaggregate. I've disaggregated to the city level, but to disaggregate to institution level and then even program level. How are transfer students faring institution-wide and then within certain programs? And are students exiting the program before completion? And then that's when you can ask the really important questions, why, and make changes so that students have more support and can complete without barriers. So I'm going to pause. Sorry, I'm going to pause right here and just do a pulse check and see if there are any questions before we move on to the next few practice recommendations. Okay. We'll go ahead and progress. So again, the first practice was disaggregating and sharing data across institutions. So that sharing piece is really important, sharing from the sending to the receiving institution. The second equitable practice is understanding the journey and recognizing that every student's experience is very, very different. Making assumptions that a certain group of students' experiences are the same it's just an assumption. And the only way to get to know what those experiences are like are to get to know the students. And I know that there are folks on this call that have different positions within institutions. Regardless of what your position is, this is really important to understanding the journey. Just to illustrate, I put a few different bullet points on here that mark big milestones in the journey. So like deciding where to transfer. If you're an indecisive person like me, that can be an emotional journey in and of itself, deciding where you're going to go after you leave an institution. And then once that decision is made, going through the application and enrollment process, which could require an immense amount of paperwork, which does require a level of literacy to complete forms, and also patience to complete forms if there are loads and loads of them. And sometimes can be a little bit daunting and confusing. When students transfer, they do have to ensure that their courses transfer. Thanks to the work of the Tulsa Transfer Project and the institutions within the consortium, a lot of these pathways have been made more seamless so that students aren't losing credits when they transfer. But for students who are like international students who are new to the US and bringing in courses from out of the country, this could be a really daunting process. And applying for financial aid, grants, I mean, if you've completed the FAFSA ever, that in and of itself is its own journey. And then orientation to new campus and policies, depending on the campus that you're located, or at which you're located, just knowing where to go on the campus to get help to have a question answered could be a demotivator from a student pursuing their degree. So demystifying and giving tours and orienting students to campus is really important. And then full admission, I learned about transfer shock just yesterday, which is actually when a student starts, they transfer from one institution to another. Some students experience a dip in their GPA or their performance as they're adjusting to a new campus, as they're adjusting to a new experience. That can be intimidating in and of itself. So these are just components of the journey. I know I've probably left a few off, and I'd love if anybody wants to chime in and share a part of the process that I haven't thought about that you have learned from students has been a big part of that journey. Please chime in. I'm going to mute myself for a second so that you have an opportunity.
I was going to say that maybe housing might be an issue for students to consider. Although they are maybe still here in the area, that may be an additional layer of consideration for them.
That's a great point, especially considering that Tulsa student profile. If you look at the demographics of students, over half of students are above the age of 25 or 24. And that's very likely a very important consideration for completing school.
This might fall into the decision piece, like where to transfer, but because we're in we have students that are in a TRIO program, a lot of them want to transfer to a school that also has a TRIO program because they want to maintain that support. They feel like if it's a TRIO program that they're going toward, that support will be maintained, while some schools may not have them and they're unsure of that support system that they might find when they get there. And then also like within the last year, this was before COVID, so within the last 2 years, I guess, I had a student specifically that wanted to look into HBCUs. And so being able to know what those were, especially the local options, was something new for me.
That is such a hugely important point. So the TRIO programs, and Joseph, I don't want to steal your thunder. I'm actually going to yield to Joseph here in a couple of slides to talk a little bit more about TRIO. But really quickly, can you just tell us who TRIO serves?
Yes, TRIO serves students that are first-generation college students, students that are low income, and students with disabilities. And the one that really maybe needs a little more information is, what's the definition of a first-generation college student? And that varies from school to school, program to program, grant to grant. And for a TRIO, it means that neither parent received a bachelor's degree or higher. So technically, a parent could have received an associate's degree at a college, but their children would still be considered for our grant program a first generation college student.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And the TRIO team at TCC is just so dynamic and are going to share about some of the supports that they have in place for the students that they serve. I do want to illuminate, I saw this resource yesterday I'm sure that there are resources like this at other institutions. If so, please share them with me so I can share them out as well. But TCC has a resource that helps students understand what the path is going to look like to transfer so that they aren't blindsided by, a roadblock or something that might take them time. So it, but semester by semester helps get them think about what is my transfer experience going to look like and what decisions do I need to make along that journey. Additionally, I can't make it through one of these presentations without highlighting the transfer portal. So I am going to do a quick little demo. This helps students see what their options are if they are interested in, whatever degree area. What does their journey need to look like, and helps demystify that process. And show students that there is the possibility of having a seamless transfer experience from start to finish when they enter TCC and then finish at whatever institution that they want to go to. So let's look at a psychology degree. Let's say a student is interested in psychology. They can go to the portal and type in psychology. Let's look at pre-nursing. And here they can see what the transfer map looks like to pursue their degree in pre-nursing psychology under the psychology umbrella. I just want to make sure you can see the transfer map, right? You give me a thumbs up if you can see the transfer map. Okay, great. So year 1 at TCC, and then what does year 2 look like? Year 3 at TU, year 4 at TU. Another one, anybody have an area they want me to look up? I'm just going with sociology. Let's look at a sociology BA from NSU. What does that look like? So here it looks just slightly different, but it's got, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year, what courses students need to take to ensure that they don't experience credit loss. This is really that trajectory and demystifying the process and making the journey easier. Okay. So now we're going to move on to equitable practice number 3, which is on that journey. Once you understand what the journey is, removing the barriers. And the very best way to diagnose what those barriers are to ask students and get their perspectives. Asking questions like, what are the most frustrating barriers encountered in your post-secondary journey? It's sometimes hard not to be married to policies and practices, but oftentimes those are the biggest deterrents and demotivators and roadblocks that kind of prevent ease of access to getting that degree. And ask, what are some quick fixes that make things easier for transfer students to navigate? Also, for the receiving institutions, there are many opportunities that first-year students have that transfer students miss out on because they weren't there in the very first year. In the last session, I said it's kind of like entering the movie theater in the middle. You have to jump in and use context clues to figure out what's happening in the plot of this story and how do I become how do I track with it to the end of the story. But things like internships and research opportunities, high impact practices that support students' completion of degrees that might be offered first year need to be offered again to those transfer students. So I want to offer a couple of questions for discussion. What other barriers might exist that could be re-examined? And then this one's more rhetorical, maybe like a reflection question. How many barriers exist because it's always the way that things have been done? There's like clinging to tradition or to the way things have always been done. So I'm going to put that question to the group. What other barriers exist that could be re-examined on transfer students' journeys?